All right, this week, boys and girls, we're going to be going over criminal law. For those of you who haven't for me for criminal justice class, this will be a review. For those that didn't, well, I'm going to teach you what other students learn in 4 months in about 15 minutes, maybe. We're going to take a quick walk through criminal law, and then tomorrow we're going to spend actually some time on the specific amendments in the Constitution that mention criminal law, including the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments. In the criminal justice system, notice it's a civil law last week was between person versus person. In this case, it's people versus all of society. When you commit a crime, you've actually offended everyone, because if we don't stop you with criminal punishment, then you're apt to do it again. So even though only one person may get harmed, everybody is offended when you break the law. The criminal justice system is actually made up of multiple things, including police, lawyers, judges, state courts, federal courts, prison systems, politicians, and criminals. The only thing we're really covering, well, we're going to do a quick walk through a few of these. We spent a lot of time with lawmakers this year, but a quick walkthrough of all of these. There are 3 types of crimes that you can be charged with. Most of you will eventually hit this first one. It's called a petty offense. In our state, it's basically or called a summary offense in Pennsylvania. This is your typical fine. You're going to get this for speeding. It's a citation. Basically, you know what the law was. You broke it. You're not going to jail. It's not a dangerous crime. You just acted recklessly. Not even recklessly. It is more of, you just broke the rules. Going 65 in a 55, that would be breaking the rules. We're going to cite you. Now, keep in mind, if you're going 90, now you're in a 55, you're going at over 35 miles an hour. Now it might be reckless. Now you'll have to go to court over 30 miles an hour over the speed limit, whether we're going to decide to revoke your license. And they also may charge you with a misdemeanor, because you could put somebody in harm's way at that. So notice how you could have very similar crimes, but one could be more elevated than the other. So for a petty offense, it's basically you did something that you knew the rules and you broke the rules. Keep in mind that ignorance is never an excuse. You can't tell the judge, I didn't know about that. That's not really something that the judge will ever take. When it comes to a traffic stop, though, it is true that these summary offenses or petty offenses can lead to other things if you're doing something else in the car. And I will tell you that you guys as teenagers are targets. So those going away on senior week, please be aware that if you're going to be speeding, those state police officers in New Jersey and in Delaware and in Maryland are all looking for you, and they don't have very good sense of humor. So please be aware of that. If you're breaking the speed limit, they will pull you over, and they're going to want to search the car. They don't have any reason to, so don't give your rights away there. But, and again, we'll talk more about that tomorrow, but, it can lead to bigger and worse crimes than these simple things if you're doing something else wrong. The second type of crime is called the misdemeanor, and this is, like I said, more of a reckless action, something that you know is dangerous. Doing 65 in a 55 is really not dangerous, especially if you're driving in one lane. Driving 95 in a 55, however, and weaving in and out of traffic, as I'm sure it was somebody else who passed you doing that, yes, that can be very dangerous, and that's why it's a misdemeanor. This is things like vandalism, punching someone once or twice, not breaking, not full-out drag-down fight. That would be to the next level. But it is certainly something that needs to be addressed. This will go on your record. It may bar you from professional jobs like being a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, a teacher, and some other things. This could be a heavy fine. It could go up to jail time. Typically it doesn't. Drug use would fall under here as well. Now, drug use is one that kind of walks a line. If, it depends on the amount. And with a certain amount, it could be a misdemeanor. A certain amount, it could be a felony, which is the next level. But you'll never know until you talk to the DA who's charging you about what kind of crime it is. So typically you don't get jail time. The only time jail time comes around for misdemeanors if you're somebody who continuously breaks a particular law. If it's your fourth time with a DUI or your fifth time being caught with marijuana, then, well, maybe you'll see some jail time. But for the most part, this is going to be a heavy fine, or some of the other punishments, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, may accompany that misdemeanor crime. And then the last one is your felony. These are for all your bad things. Everybody thinks murder or, kidnapping. All those fall into felony type of crimes. Typically, this does end in jail time. It will certainly show up on your record for forever. You will not any longer have the right to vote. Acts of terrorism have been obviously added to this list. With these type of crimes, obviously, jail or at minimum, you're going to get probation is going to likely accompany these types of crimes. So, if you get charged with a crime, here's what the procedure. Obviously, the police are going to investigate. They're going to arrest. Eventually, the prosecution is going to give charges, and at that point, they're going to set your bail. That's going to be your first appearance in court. Then they're going to have a preliminary hearing, or a grand jury hearing, which is to determine if there's enough evidence to have the case go to trial. If there is, which there is most of the time, or it's not going to be worth the DA's time, then they're going to move it along. If there's not, then they're going to stop the case right there. After that, you're going to see what's called an arraignment. Now you get to respond. You'll go back to court. You'll get to respond to the accusations made against you, and you can answer guilty, not guilty. There is also no contest that typically only occurs because of civil matters. Typically, the response is guilty or not guilty by the defendant. If you're going to say that you're guilty, typically a plea bargain, as you can see here, has been reached at this point. Both the prosecution and the defense have come to an equitable punishment, and the case is over at that point. If you answer not guilty, then we'll continue to move on to trial. Once you get to trial, by the way, only 5% of cases typically make it to trial. About 95% are actually plea bargained. And most cases, if they do make it, are within 9 to 12 months in the state of Pennsylvania. Some are a little bit longer, some a little bit shorter. Pennsylvania is about 9 to 12 months between the arrest and the actual trial date. Once you go through court, a decision is made by the jury. If you have a jury of your peers, you may also decide to take a court decision made solely by the judge. That's fine as well. That is your option, whether you want to do that. And then if you're found guilty, then, of course, sentencing. So we're going to take a look through some of the criminal punishments that can be made. The most often is fines. Typically, obviously, every time you get a speeding ticket, that's a fine. Government likes their money, and PA is no exception. So they would like to take your money if you're going to offer it by breaking laws. And certainly that is the easiest type of punishment. Usually gets its point across pretty quick. Second is community service. Community service is often given, especially for people that have now broken the law a couple of times. It's a way for criminals to give back and maybe learn a little bit from what they've done wrong. And, if you're somebody who's vandalized the park, maybe they will have you cleaning up the park. Or if you're, going back and working with kid groups, sometimes the things in the auditorium that you guys get to hear over here that you love so much is sometimes a criminal doing part of their community service. They have to go back and warn kids about the dangers of drugs or bad decisions and how it's led to them. Sometimes community service will come along with probation, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and you have to do so many community service hours. Sometimes they have you work in the morgue, especially if you've had DUIs, to see the results of what happens when you drink and drive. So judges can get very creative with criminal punishments, and certainly community service is one of them. Obviously, they're not going to have pedophiles doing community service at the YMCA, but people working with youth groups, stuff like that, could certainly be something helping kids to stay out of jail themselves. The next one, like I said, is probation. Now, I've skipped over a few here. We're just giving some highlights. Probation is if you go to Montgomery County Correctional, they'll tell you that this might be worse than jail. Think of probation as living with mom and dad, and there's no breaking the rules. In other words, every time you break the rule, you go back to jail. This can be a very tough life for a lot of guys. If you change jobs and you don't tell your probation officer, you go back to jail. You move, you go back to jail. You're found outside of the borders where they tell you to be at, you go back to jail. You take drugs or you have alcohol, you go back to jail. Maybe you're at a party and you're not actually the one taking drugs or alcohol, but other people around you are. Well, guess what? You're surrounded by it. You're going back to jail. It is very, very difficult, and many of the inmates do not like it, and they prefer to finish their time in jail and not have probation at all. With that said, basically, what's done is you are appointed a court-appointed supervisor, and they're going to watch your moves, and they're going to kind of dictate what you're going to do in your life. They do have ankle monitors now where you cannot have any alcohol in your body whatsoever, and if it's picked up on that ankle bracelet that you've had alcohol, you're going back to jail. It's some pretty strict rules there, so now you can see why a lot of people do not like probation, and it can be a very difficult and stressful time for inmates until they either end up back in jail or they finish that time. And if you end up back in jail, your life is going to start all over. Let's say you are at the party and you weren't actually the one drinking, but you're going to have to wait to stand before a judge, which may take 3 to 6 months. And in that time, you're going to stay in the jail. You tell the judge, I wasn't drinking, I had zero in my alcohol. The judge agrees with you. Hey, you're back set free, but now you've been incarcerated for the last 3 to 6 months. You'd have to come out and get a new cell phone. You'll probably have to find a new job, transportation, housing, and unless your family is very generous, it's a very difficult life living in the world of probation. And then, of course, we have incarceration or jail time. Obviously, plenty of movies, plenty of things to see about jail. It can be a very difficult and demanding life. It's very boring, 24 hours, 7 days a week in that same part of the jail. There are jails throughout there are jobs throughout the jails, and a lot of inmates will take jobs, not high-paying jobs, but jobs nonetheless. And obviously, if you've committed a felony, this is probably where you're going to spend some of your time, and depending on the type of crime, is the jail that you're going to spend the time in. And obviously, the most controversial of all of the criminal punishments is, of course, the death penalty. Now, keep in mind, there are only 3 ways that the death penalty can actually be applied, that the government can take your life. One is an act of treason. You've betrayed the country. We talked about Edward Snowden. If he were to ever come back to the United States, could be tried for treason for releasing that information about the government spying on people. Number 2 is an act of terrorism. And that's a pretty broad definition, act of terrorism, especially after 9/11. So that gives the government a wide range to use there. Not used too liberally, but it can be defined very liberally. And then number 3, first-degree murder, which is a type of murder where you've planned out the murder beforehand, or it involves a lengthy death, sometimes even including torture. Since 1976, when they reinstituted the death penalty, we've only had 3 in Pennsylvania. Many states do not use the death penalty that often. As a matter of fact, some states have even outlawed now the death penalty, in which case that person would get life in prison without parole. So that's, like I said, the quick walkthrough our criminal justice process and punishment. Tomorrow we'll take a look at the, like I said, the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments, things that protect you in case you're ever confronted by the police. So we'll take a little bit of a look at that and how that will affect you. Until then, have a wonderful day.